Hello, welcome back, and thank you for joining me today. We're going to take a look today at our fear to look within. How about that? Fear to look within. And in the process, we'll talk quite a bit about the ego and the Holy Spirit and how the two don't even recognize each other. They don't speak. They don't hang out after work for a couple of beers after striving mightily against each other all day long, like attorneys. They don't meet up on the golf course and enjoy 18 holes of golf and head back into the courtroom and do pitched battle. They don't communicate nor recognize one another at all. This is why our choice, our present moment choice, every moment of every day is so important because the ego and the Holy Spirit are only two choices. Don't even recognize one another. Our choice is total. It is total. If you choose the Holy Spirit, you choose the Holy Spirit. If you choose the ego, you have the ego. You cannot have both. Mm. The resistance, that's the ego. Always, always. It's this voice that may say, well, I want to have both. I want to love on 99% of the people in this world and reserve my own special form of vitriol and hatred for that 1%. Uh, uh, Choice is total. We must accept this as adult learners here on the spiritual path. So, as students of the course, we have this idea presented to us in many different ways over and over again until we adopt it and recognize, you know what? That's true, isn't it? Forgiveness is either total or it's not at all. Either I'm allowing the Holy Spirit to guide me, or I'm thinking that I'm off guiding myself, being led by a mistake that's not real and has absolutely no idea what it's doing. It's driving the car off of a cliff, a very tall and high cliff with jagged rocks at the bottom, waiting to smash the car into many, many little tiny pieces. Sounds dramatic. Good. Our present moment choice is important, very important. When we side with the ego, this false sense of individual self, by ego, we mean this sense of separation, the idea of separation, that we're separate from our brother, we're separate from every other living thing. In other words, all people, all animals, all that stuff, and we're separate from God. When we talk about separation here in the Course, that's what we're talking about. This sense that we've somehow managed to split off, break off, run off, and have our own party, disdaining the party of heaven in favor of our own little show down here. There's another word that precedes show, and modernly they form a perfectly meaningful and accurately descriptive singular word, with show being the second syllable. That's what we're going through as we think we're an ego. Suffering, separation, it's not fun, which is why we're all on the spiritual path in the first place, because we've recognized, however briefly and however distantly it might have seemed to be, that there's more to it than this. Oh, and most certainly there is. You have a choice in the present moment between exactly two options. One is the ego, suffering pain, brutality, and death and stuff, or the Holy Spirit, limitlessness, love, peace, the peace of God. That's our choice. When we think we're an individual, when we think we're separate, we're simply siding with the ego. It is. And we do this because we've been conditioned to do it. That's why we appear to be here having this conversation today. It's necessary because we think we're individuals. We are convinced that we're individual human beings with our own set of individualized traits, with our own set of individualized characteristics and labels and categories and subcategories, slicing and dicing with the intellectual, supposedly rational, haha, thinking mind, slicing and incising reality into tiny little component parts and sub component parts to the point where it is confusing and unrecognizable. Mm, yeah. I mean, don't feel singled out. We've all been doing it. Hence the need for this course. So, welcome. The ego does not want you to look within. It really doesn't. It's happy, however, to have you think of yourself as a miserable sinner. It's happy for you to see guilt and sin. And it's very approving and very happy for you to feel ashamed. So, would you continue to follow a supposed guide that wants you to be unhappy, that says, yes, feel ashamed, sinner, miserable sinner? You should feel ashamed. Would you readily continue to follow this thing as a guide when it wants your unhappiness? And would you readily continue to follow this guide when you know that it wants your unhappiness, your continued misery? Here's the deal about sin. I know that many of you were raised in a Judeo-Christian tradition that posited that each and every single one of us is a sinner. And many people wear that as a badge of honor. They do. You know them. We all know them. There are many friends of ours, perhaps family members, and perhaps you wore that as a badge of honor at some point in your life, and maybe you still do. I don't know. You're here for a reason. There is no sin. God has no ego to be offended. There's no separation of any kind. So how can anyone sin against anyone else if there's no one else and there's no separation? There's only perfect oneness. Sin is completely impossible. You're not a sinner. You may have been raised otherwise. I was certainly raised otherwise. And some of you may know, if you've tuned in to these videos before, that I was raised in the United States in not one, but actually two rather fundamentalist Christian traditions. And by fundamentalist, I simply mean a prevailing belief, which granted not every single member of the church and congregation shared, but predominantly it was the party line that our building is the only building. That building across the street where they get together and they hold their ceremonies and services on a different day? Wrong. Our building is the only building. I never bought it, and I've sat through many a sermon. Perhaps you, I mean, perhaps you can relate. Many a Sunday school lesson, and I was, in fact, one of those kids in Sunday school that wanted to know why perfect love would ever condemn. That I never could swallow. That Kool-Aid, reject. And no one ever came out with what amounted to me to be a satisfactory answer. So, quite naturally, this has served as great opportunity for forgiveness. And yeah, I've forgiven all of that because, well, I've been studying the course, and that's how we do this. That's how we put this material into practice. So, yeah, it is what it is. That was the way I was raised, with a very pronounced notion of sin, and worn by many people, at most in those congregations, as a badge of honor. A look at me, a martyr. Hmm, calling it like it is, a miserable sinner, worthy of punishment and death. The ego would happily have you believe that and continue to believe that. It reinforces your deep guilt over and over. Guilt from what? Guilt from apparently separating from God. We think we've separated from God. We have not, but because we're convinced that we have, there is a deep well of unconscious guilt. Each act of forgiveness helps us clear some of that unconscious guilt. The Holy Spirit knows all about that in our mind and knows what to present to us and handles the clearing of that unconscious guilt. We don't even know about it. Yet you can count on the fact that anytime you truly forgive, whatever you're truly forgiving on the surface of life in your day to day experience corresponds to some piece of this deep unconscious guilt. The Holy Spirit clears it for you. Our part, show up and forgive. His part, much larger, leave it to him because he knows about it. Remember, this guilt is unconscious. We're not aware of it. But now you're aware of how this all works. The ego wants you to feel miserable and little and ashamed and doesn't want you to look within. And amidst all of its constant chatter and yammering and bleating, shouts and shrieks and violent drama to garner and keep your awareness and attention at all times, the ego is terrified that you will look within and see no sin. It does not want you to do this. It does not want you to look within and see complete sinlessness. It doesn't recognize the Holy Spirit. The ego and the Holy Spirit don't play golf. They don't go to the bar and chat after a day of courtroom battle. To continue with that vivid example, which certainly fits, doesn't do that. The ego doesn't know about the Holy Spirit, but it is somehow dimly aware of what it thinks is an unknown enemy. The ego is terrified that you'll set it aside. So it, at first, through guile and little gentle persuasion, asks for and receives your attention and allegiance. The more you study this course, the more you tune in to the Holy Spirit, your inner teacher, my inner teacher, our inner teacher, the voice for God, the more you relax and trust this voice, the more terrified and louder the ego becomes. And now that you're here studying this course, it is far too threatened to even bother to pretend that it's your friend. Paragraph 3, very famous line from A Course in Miracles, chapter 21, section 4, paragraph 3. You have now threatened the ego's fundamental defenses so much and to such a great degree that it is not going to even bother to pretend it's your friend any longer. It will get violent and loud, and perhaps it's violent and loud right now, shouting that this pixelated image on your screen is wrong. Okay, that this course is wrong. How could this ever be? That's the ego talking. All resistance is of the ego. You may count on that. Now, when something lands for you, it's the Holy Spirit. You may count on that also. 100%. We're invited to look within, of course. There is no sin. The ego doesn't want you to look within and see that, but the Holy Spirit encourages you to look within and see that. At some point here, whenever that was, you may be consciously aware of that, or perhaps not. It doesn't matter. But at some point, you have seen someone else's interests as your own. You've seen your brother's interests as your own. You have, in fact, joined with him, with her, with them, and you're no longer wholly insane. Isn't that exciting? You're no longer completely nuts and mad because you have done something very important. You have joined, however briefly, with your brother. I mean, you may vividly recall a time where you did just that. There are many ways that this plays out, of course, in life. And you're here, number one, because you've listened to and answered the call of our inner teacher to awaken. You've entered what we call the path by realizing, yeah, there's more to it than just showing up and doing this pitched battle and drinking a beer afterwards, getting up tomorrow and doing the whole thing all over again ad infinitum until the communication device, this little device, loses its vigor completely. Yeah, there's more to it than that. Much more. You know that. That's why you're here. And you're interested in A Course in Miracles, which tells me that at more than one point, I'm sure, you have joined with your brother. You have seen another's interests as your own, not as similar to yours or analogous to yours, but as your own. Yes, you're no longer wholly insane. This language comes directly from the Course. This is paragraph 4 here, chapter 21, section 4. If you're following along. So, what we do is we look within. We look with the Holy Spirit. We allow the Holy Spirit to look for us. In so doing, there is no need for us to fear that we're giving our power away. Rather, we're accessing it. Again, what we're calling the Holy Spirit here, because it's a term that's used here in A Course in Miracles. It's our inner teacher. It goes by many names, and you may, in fact, call it whatever you want to call it. It's part of our mind. So, in appealing to it for guidance and saying, look for me, see this for me, judge this for me. In doing that, you're in fact accessing your power because the Holy Spirit is part of you. You're not giving it away. You give it away when you think you're an individual and run around spinning in the ego's frantic dream world. Done playing that game? Well, you don't have to say yes consciously today, but you've said it before, or you wouldn't appear to be here. This wouldn't pop up in your feed. I mean, we can all be pretty confident of that, right? Even if this was just something that popped up randomly for you today on YouTube, you don't even have to be a course student at all. In fact, it's not necessary to get a lot out of these videos. I mean, you know what has landed for you. That's a message for you from our inner teacher. And it's entirely likely that you've received more than one of those. If it's just one, no problem. There's always a reason for everything that appears to come up for us. There are zero coincidences, no chance encounters. They may appear to be chance encounters or random. They're not random at all. So I thank you very much for tuning in here, and I invite you to go ahead and subscribe if you have not. So a number of you have recently, and thank you so much for doing that. This is the prompt in the corner of your screen. Yeah, I invite you to join us. I mean, if you haven't joined us yet, please do. You're here for a reason. And this course, well, is deep. It leads you to truth, which is beyond all of our concepts. It points the way. You deserve nothing less. If you're tired of playing the ego's runaround game, yeah, join us. And please feel free also to ask questions if you've got them. This is intended to be a space for dialogue, and the dialogue is quite vibrant from time to time here. So let me invite your particular questions, should you have them, about A Course in Miracles or about spirituality in general. And also, let me put this out there, that if there is a particular topic that you're interested in seeing a standalone video or a series of standalone videos about, I'm happy to record those. So if there's something that's kind of nagging out there that you just would like some clarification on, or you'd like to see discussed a little bit further, please feel welcome to ask the question here. I'm happy to do this, and it's always, always worthwhile because there are plenty of other people that are wondering the same thing. Yeah, I mean, it's the way that that works. So, in asking a question, in inquiring, you're in fact positively influencing the trajectory of someone on the other side of the world, most likely, whom you're not likely to run into in person. Hmm. So it's pretty cool. Yeah, let's leave it at that. It's pretty cool. All right. So thank you for joining me today. I'll see you soon.